I think that's actually where the real like cleverness of this deck list comes in. He runs a whole fan of different one drops. He goes as far as to run Fel per kit, and other than that, has the May, has the Water Fairy, the Goblin, has all these token generators. We might actually see with pretty decent consistency that he actually could get this effect off. But what I'm going to be looking for is I don't know if you win the game if you get Woodland Band off. So like it's big. +2/+2 is big, but like is that enough? That's something that I like.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see. The decks are going to be Sword and Forest to kick things off, so let's see how the mulligans play out, and take it away, guys.
Alright, so aggro Sword versus aggro Forest is something that I actually would consider to be really tough for aggro Sword usually. And you said that you had your money on Kionys here, but something that that crossed my mind is I realized Kionys really does a lot of different stuff. Like he has a lot of different tricks. Like we saw him play combo, I remember a long time ago. Some really, really strange decks back in the day. Things that had Mystic Ring. I'm pretty sure, was it him who had OTK Dragon maybe? Then we saw him bring things like Control, like Seraph, and now he's bringing like triple aggro.
Yeah, he is, I think what he's doing is, he's just trying to be unpredictable, man. He's just, you know what? You're never going to pin down my lineup because I'm bringing something new every time. Every single time. Every time we've seen him. He brings something completely different to the table.
Yeah, and I'd say like perhaps he just does this like both because he wants to be unpredictable and he's like making those meta calls. Like he's probably thinking maybe people are still playing D-Shift. I know a couple players are, not Pain in this case, but that's like starting to really repopularize aggro in a lot of forms. But I wasn't expecting to see Sword much, even just through the recent changes.
I'm actually a little surprised to see Sword in a format where aggro Forest is so good. I'm a little surprised because Wood of Brambles is, it basically just shuts off Sword. You can freely trade with any of your fairies into any of their really any of their drops. It doesn't matter what their costs are because they're usually 1 or 2 defense. So you can just trade out freely and you can push damage. And what does Sword do? They can't trade back.
I think the board we're looking at here more or less just like sums up this whole matchup. Like he had to trade his turn 3 Juliet into an Elfchild May. The Wood of Brambles is still on the board if he had played anything else. I think, as you mentioned, that card can just single-handedly just decide this matchup.
I mean, you can see it on Kionys' face. He's got his hand on his head. He's
yeah. I mean that is pretty much just is this matchup. But if Sword did, oh my god, I forgot that was possible.
Yeah, that feels really bad, man. I would be surprised if Kionys even continued this game. Like that would have come back down, and he still can't trade into anything.
And what makes it so unfortunate as well is aggro Sword has a lot of followers. There's 2 in particular we're looking at between Centaur, Vanguard, and Palace Fencer that want to get that immediate burst in, but they exchange their defense for it in order to get those like effects of Storm or some kind of board impact. But in this situation, it just doesn't help at all. So if Sword were to have a way in on this matchup, I guess that like being on the play could definitely help him. The evolve point isn't really that significant here. So what would he need to really get back into this?
He would need to have cards like Albert, and he would just have to ignore the board. Just go face. He would just have to, you know what, man? I can't contest your board. So I have to do everything I possibly can to get as much damage in as I can. And right now, what we're seeing is he's trading, but we already know that's a losing proposition. We already know.
I'd say like the toughest part of this matchup is just that even if you do manage to get like a pretty decent swing off the evolve and just get back onto the board, he looks like he's just completely done with this. He's not even looking anymore actually. But when Wood of Brambles gets bounced, that is usually the point at which like an extra 2 turns of having to deal with it, just still not being able to get anything onto the board, opponent's still at full defense. It's just so rough to see aggro Sword have to try to deal with it.
I mean, as Kionys, you know he has Widow Brambles in hand. He doesn't even have to play it right now, okay? He doesn't have to play it. It can just sit in his hand for a while. And just these fairies alone, I mean, he's at Pain is at 20, and Kionys is, he's at 18. But look at what he's got. He's got like no cards in hand, or okay, I guess he has 2 cards in hand, but no cards in hand. And
Basically, yeah.
yeah. And Pain he's got value in hand with another. He's still got the Widow Bramble.
It's like, even if you were in a situation where both managed to grind out and both were low on cards, like just Wood of Brambles plus the 2 fairies clears out so much of Sword. But yeah, I think what we're probably going to see going along to the end of this matchup is Kionys has his damage setups. Usually, like Kunoichi Master, really interesting. I think she's become really popular lately, especially because of how well this card performs against D-Shift. But even playing it out here, even doing this pre-evolve, I doubt he's going to trade with it. Oh, he does actually.
And he did.
Well, ouch.
Yeah, trading there feels really bad. At this point, this just looks really bad. This looks really bad. And I know I keep saying that, but that's because the more I say it, the worse it looks.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not trying to rub this in, this just looks painful. But anyway, I think it's just, like, I don't fault Kionys at all for bringing Aggro Sword. It can, like, no matter how tough this matchup looks, I'm sure that there are a lot of other things that Aggro Sword counters really well. I imagine it would have done better against other decks. But, Forest unbanned, this matchup is probably something that he knew was going to have to happen, so, ooh.
Alright, yeah, he just threw in the towel. He's like, alright, you know what, man, just get this out of here. Get it out. I don't want to see this anymore.
Oh, I'm gone, moving on.
I honestly, okay, so let's say the situation was reversed. Let's say that Kionys had actually been on the play in that matchup. You think that would have played out any differently?
I think there's a chance, because it can be so rough against a deck that works so fast like Aggro Forest, where if you're on the play, maybe you'll have that extra little bit of tempo where you can manage to get something on board, and then you'll be in control of trades, or you'll get some damage in before Wood of Bramble starts to take you over. But it's really tough to say, it's just such a hard matchup, so we're gonna have to see and hope, like Kionys, that he figures something different out here.
Well, at least he knows he won't have to see Forest anymore. He knows he won't have to see that anymore because of the concession. However, Daria, we see over there, and Kionys is again on the draw.
Now this is actually a pretty interesting matchup, just going back in ancient times, I would say, back to Rage of Bahamut, or Rise of Bahamut. I think Sword used to struggle immensely versus Daria, but that was before the nerf to Piercing Rune, just because it's actually kind of the similar reason. I think this is just a fundamental weakness of Sword as a class. If it gets successfully shoved off the board, it's not really a class that has a lot of tools that can get back onto it. So here, being on the draw isn't so bad, just because I think Sword has a much higher window to play the game. There's no early game where Daria is going to shove them down. But it still all highly depends on how Pain draws out here.
Well, right now his hand, I mean, he does have the Clark next turn, but his hand's not looking particularly stellar. At least not for the next turn, because he did skip turn 2, which generally you don't want to do. Unfortunately, he didn't have a choice. So he did skip the turn 2. He obviously Kionys is going face, not sure what he was thinking about there.
Sometimes it's just
Do
take
I hit
time.
him or not?
Sometimes I see players just like take time to think about what they're gonna do in the future, or like in later turns. Something that's kind of rough here is this is a pretty slow turn from Pain, but I think, especially going up ahead, even if he just does something as simple as using a Piercing Rune next turn, I think he's going to start to pick up a lot of pace once he gets the Magic Owl evolved. And that's really interesting to me, because we haven't really seen a massive amount of Daria since even before the changes. I think we saw a popularization of it after the JCG tournament winner with like that Shift Mammoth deck, but I'm seeing a lot more of it now. A lot of players have brought it today with Magic Owl. So you think that this deck is like the thing to bring now?
I think think it's pretty good. If you think about it, Daria has always been, or for the most part, it's always been a tempo-oriented deck. And with aggro kind of coming back into the foil, primarily due to the change the dimension shift, with aggro coming back into the foil, Daria certainly has a place again, I think. Maybe not where it once was. At
Hopefully
untouchable
never
status.
again where it once was, yeah.
At untouchable status, but it definitely has a place now, I think.
Though, I guess this is actually looking really rough for Pain because this is a really, really good turn for Kionys to have Geno. It lets him get the trade in and you spend an Evo point face, and that could just decide it with the amount of damage you can push through with Master and Aloydus.
Well, let's see. Pain can play the Owl next turn.
Interesting.
He can Evo the Owl. He can play Ogler, but he won't be able to play the Chimera or either of his
Daria,
yeah.
And I guess the situation we're looking at is exactly what does Pain have to draw next turn that just gets him out of this? Because I think with 8 defense left, this could just be him falling too far behind to be able to make this one up.
I don't know. Maybe he could. A Piercing Rune would certainly help clear the board up a little. I think it's pretty much the only thing he could draw, because he would be able to Magic Owl, Evo, Piercing Rune, Ogler. But again, as we see, that's not even going to clear the board. Not even clear the board.
Okay. I like 2 more Piercing Runes. He did have it. I was thinking for a second, like, so if he gets like Insight or something along those lines, that I think still doesn't help it much.
No, he did get a snipe, so he can kill the Geno. But there's still going to be one guy who will follow, which is the Perseus.
Yeah, actually, now that I take a second look at this, the snipe was pretty huge. It's a lot of damage shoved off, even though there's still a huge setup. But at the very least, he has Chimera and Zarya coming up. Though, I think the setup of the Kunoichi Master might just do him in here anyway.
Yeah, he won't be able to do anything about the Kunoichi Master. It's just going to come down. Kionys' health is way too high. I don't really see that that's going to be able to happen here. I think we got some connection problems.
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't do him in, though. He's doing so well this game.
Yeah, he's doing really well this game. I hope he doesn't just auto disconnect and then it's like, oh man, that would
be heartbreaking. Yeah.
Oh man. So Mofu, just a little thing, man. This is the first time that we've casted together.
It is, which is actually kind of surprising to me because like we've known each other for like long before actually just becoming part of the guest rotation.
Yeah, it is interesting, but it's nice to cast with you.
Yeah, likewise. It's like I haven't really had the chance to talk to you about like your opinions on a lot of different decks or how you feel about a lot of classes and things like that. So it's kind of cool hearing your thoughts on Daria because I know I think it was actually way back around like just going into Tempest and Daria was still just pretty decently played before the next expansion that we actually kind of like met.
Right. Okay, so Kionys did take that last game pretty convincingly, a little bit in reverse. So now we're gonna see Blood versus what we know as Daria. So I believe this is aggro Blood, right?
To take another look at it, yeah, this is aggro Blood with my man has the card that I've been trying to sell for the longest time, even if just only 2 copies. He runs Angelic Knight in here, and this is something that I've come to really, really love in Bloodcraft because it is one of the most brutal follow-ups to Urius I have ever seen.
Well, it pumps your Urius and protects it all the same. So yeah, it's pretty brutal. All right, looks like we got a minor connection problem.
Yeah. Anyway, in the meantime, as that gets figured out, I want to see how that next match goes out because at first we saw Kionys just kind of take it with his sword list. It just really didn't look like a good time for him. But after that, he did prove that there is still some pretty decent tempo he was able to earn off of it. Even being on the draw, he still managed to get such a huge defense lead and just kind of finish that out before Pain even had a chance to really play out any Darius. So I still don't have any data on Agrosword.
I actually think the turning point for that matchup was just simply turn 2. The turn 2 pass into sword. That seems pretty bad. I think that was the change point.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Now, something that I've noticed that Sword has picked up a lot lately, back in the day, Sword to me used to be defined by getting ticked by Quick Blader on turn 1. That was like, if I'm against Swordcraft, I'm gonna take a tick from Quick Blader on turn 1. But recently I've noticed there's been this huge shift to playing things like Perseus and Vanguard, and trying to develop that into a Princess Vanguard on turn 2 all the time. And I've noticed that just seems so strong to me. We saw in that game too, you get to push so much damage. I think that
Yeah.
that's like more or less where Sword is headed. I think if we get to see, especially in the next expansion, Sword get any more tools that helps it kind of keep boards together or continue that kind of I play a body and then I buff it with my next body, then we might actually see a lot of like a new like revival of the class for how little it's been played lately.
It is really interesting too, right? The new expansion is actually taking away a lot of removal options that were available previously, a lot of very strong ones. And I think classically, when you compare Sword to the other crafts, one of the things that it fell behind on a lot is removal, right? So
Mhm.
we'll see if that affects kind of the board state. What do you guys think about the Daria matchups here? What do you think are the ways that Daria gets a win? I know, for example, for weeks now it feels like, but Envy is a very big supporter of Daria, and she says that it's definitely coming back into the meta, and she thinks it has a place. Where do you guys stand with that? Aya, what do you think about the list? Where do you think its strengths are in terms of the matchups it wants to hit?
One of the best things about Daria is just being able to flood out on like a turn where your opponent is just, I can't do anything about that. So they kind of play a little bit of a control game in the early game, try to keep the damage low, and then when they get to like turn 4 or 5, they want to just start jamming things. And as we know, like turn 4 or 5, those are like the most important turns of the game, and that's when Daria really starts going. So I think that's its biggest strength. It does incredibly well against aggro with the right draw. Okay, it does tend to lose the bigger board wipes. So, but that's mainly most decks. Daria is not one of those decks that
Uh-oh.
I'd.
Aya
I
Senpai,
think we could still.
somebody
Oh.
turned off the lights. Oh, no, we're back.
Am I good?
Yeah, we're back.
Mhm.
But
Am I?
yeah, you're square. You're perfectly looking great with the shades. But I think you make a really good point, right? Kind of that board flood. Uh, of course, the weaknesses are continuous kind of board removal things that can happen, and spinning up and getting that draw is really important for Daria. But we certainly saw Aggro Sword being one step ahead there. But even in that scenario, there are situations where you can get turn 4 Darias and stuff like that that can play against those kinds of curves, right? Is that? I mean, what do you think is the ideal scenario for Daria in that situation, Mofu?
In that situation, I actually think there was only one card that completely denied Pain from coming back into the game, and that was Kunoichi Master. I mentioned it was good against D-Shift, but perhaps it might be better to more broadly say it's really good against Runecraft. His last two cards he had in his hand were a 2-cost Daria and a 2-cost Chimera, and that, given anything with any impact off of Daria, would have cleared. And that's really tough for Sword to come back from. He would have had 8 defense left, cleared the board, and taken it. So he would have seen the deck really shine there. But because of Ambush alone, he just wasn't able to figure out anything. There's no cards in the class really, other than weird stuff like Fire Chain that really deals with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the spirit of the frog lives on in in Swordcraft. A little update for you guys here. Having a little bit of connection issues and kind of technical difficulties, so we're trying to see if we can make sure all that is set to go so that Kionys doesn't get into a bad situation here, as well as kind of just making sure that all the players are playing in an environment that they feel like is conducive to them finishing out the game. So we're kind of trying to make sure everything is in line before we continue. And that's why we're just kind of here hanging out. So I actually think the topic of what's going to happen when rotation hits is super interesting for all these classes. I think Daria is going to be very affected as well, correct, with the rotation. And it's just interesting to try to forecast some of these things. And I saw a really cool community tool that somebody made, and it was posted on the Reddit. That was a compilation of all the cars that were going to be rotated out. And I think there were some assumptions made, right? And it's kind of unclear what's going to happen because I think that the official announcement said that certain choice basic cards were to remain. And I think right now all we can assume is, oh, all the basic cards are going to remain. But I'm interested to know which ones they're actually going to keep, if not all of them. Senpai, what are some of the things that you're most looking forward to with rotation in terms of like things that you want to try or crafts that you want to play or play styles that you haven't done before?
Well, I have been playing a lot of Blood recently, which is kind of weird because I'm mainly a Haven player. But I've been playing a lot of Blood recently. Blood has been a lot of fun. I want something that brings me back to Haven. That's what I want. Right now, I just don't feel like there's anything for me with that. I don't like playing Heavenly Aegis. Stormhaven, I'm not really fond of either at the moment. Not that it's a bad deck, I'm just not fond of it. But I've been playing Control Blood, Vengeance Blood, you name it, Blood. I've been playing it. So I want something to bring me back to Haven.
It sounds like Aya Senpai is just looking for God right now. He's gone to Blood and plays all the devil creatures and all the. Please, somebody bring the gospel to Aya. Let him see the light. Somebody. What about for you, Mofu? Anything in particular for you in terms of rotation and what you want to see?
Gosh, I've looked into this a lot, and I'm just throwing my hands up and saying, I'm just gonna stockpile gold and just wait for them to reveal the rest of the set coming up, because I think that this is going to be, I could be wrong, but I think I'm gonna be right, the single most important set ever printed in the history of Shadowverse, because this is the first set that has such a tall order of 2 full expansions to replace, and whatever little basic cards, as you mentioned, do end up making it or not. There's a lot of super important stuff that is core to and limits sort of what Cygames can do with some classes that are leaving now. Like, can you imagine a world where Forest doesn't have Rhinoceros or Ancient Elf, or a world where Diabolic? Yeah, I can. We got hit circle that, but
looks like we have our game back. But yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Just to finish the thought, I was just thinking, this set's probably going to have a lot of really cool ways that just extend the classes into new territories we've just never seen before. But anyway, getting back to the games, it's a really good thing that we managed to get this back. I was afraid, Kionys finally getting that win with Sword, doing so well at getting that consistent victory, staying in the game, that I didn't want to watch him end up taking a loss to a connection issue or anything like that.
Yeah, that would have been very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, but now going into this matchup, you just mentioned that you play a ton of Blood lately, and I think it's probably worth mentioning then that I am a Blood neophyte. I am still level 70-ish with it. I've not played much past the solo, the story mode. So how do you think this works out, this matchup here? It's I believe aggro ending its curve with Karabos against Daria. This is not a matchup I've personally ever played.
Well, this matchup can be really, really hard. And it gets exponentially harder when you're on the draw, which unfortunately Kionys has happened to be in all 3 games. I say that because when Daria is able to just kind of control the board in the early game, he played Owl out early, he managed to draw another one, but he played Owl out early, so he will be able to, possibly value trade and whatnot. He's playing another Owl to do that anyway. But being able to do this enables him to be able to control the board a lot better. But we do see that Kionys has that Angel of the Word punishes value trade.
Right. So it's a little bit of back and forth. I noticed this is a really core part of Daria is they used to do this with Levi, and saying that just occurred to me that Levi has been effectively replaced in every deck by this Owl. Yeah, I just checked. He doesn't run Levi's in here.
Except for Burn Rune.
Except for Burn Rune, yes, that's very correct. But you feel me on this, right? Daria's main thing back in the day was Levi. I think that's the card that turned everyone's head.
Yeah, that was the card that people were like, oh, they didn't want to see it because Piercing Rune was 1. Okay, so people didn't want to see that. It would be, your opponent went second, and then they play Levy, and then they could just straight rival board by trading, play Crimson Sorcery into a Piercing Rune, and it's just not something you wanted to see.
Yeah, actually, back when Piercing Rune reduced itself to 1 cost, I remember my favorite feeling was when they went first, in fact, and on turn 5 went Levi, Crimson Sorcery, Piercing Rune, and I took like 8 damage from it. The deck was pretty incredible back then, but
Yeah.
it really amazes me seeing like, I guess it only really occurred to me seeing Owl being played out in the same way they used to play out Levi to try to flood in or jam the flood of damage from aggro decks, that that Owl really has like almost entirely replaced him.
Yeah. Simply put, Owl's good, man. Spell
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Owl's good, and it is only 2 play points, whereas I guess it is the spiritual successor to Spectral Wizard, which costs 3 and had the same effect.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I remember Spectral Wizard saw like tournament play in like one off chance a single time in his life, and now Owl carries on his legacy. But that said, it seems like Owl's even beyond needing to be used for the revolve effect here are doing just a fine job. Pain hasn't taken that much damage yet. It probably helps being on the play as well, helps keep his defense stable, and he looks like he has a really good follow-up to this. Maybe
Now,
even won't use the Mystic Ring, but...
What we might end up seeing, and I'm pretty positive of this, what we might end up seeing is Daria showing her strength, okay? Excuse me. Yeah, I think we're going to see Daria show her strength. Daria's going to come back, and Daria, I believe that Daria is at 4 or 3, I can't tell, but I
it's at
believe
3.
it's 3. Okay, so Daria is going to be very good this coming turn, I think.
I think especially... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that Angelic Snipe will clear out something. He can then play the Daria, get a full new hand. This is something that Blood can't really do, and not to mention he will be able to clear board on this follow-up turn of the Daria Pain. Be able to clear board.
Yeah. Something I was about to point out too is it's kind of interesting. I guess I didn't even notice this at all until seeing Karabos has had her stat line changed, and she's the exact same as Daria now. I feel like they actually kind of play the same role in this sort of list, where Daria is a matter of you speed this up and then you toss it out so you can refill. Karabos is kind of like you start fast, then you toss her out so you can refill, just in like a completely different kind of flavor.
Right. There's a little bit of a difference between, and I actually did want to talk about Karabos's, I'll say change, where she's now a 5/5. Before, Karabos could trade into a Daria who was evoed and live. Not anymore.
That's actually like such an insane thing to hear said out loud, but yeah.
Yeah. Not anymore. Can't do that anymore.
I think that change actually is going to be shown in pretty full colors here, but Pain has a really solid grasp of this game so far. Has already managed to find his other Daria, already boosting it, and I don't think... Well, I guess we could look at it this way. If Kionys gets his board cleared here, is there any draw that can either... I don't think there's any draw that gives him the reach, but any draw that can manage to take the board back.
I don't think so. This is what I was talking about before. This exact scenario. Turn 5, around-ish. Turn 5, turn 6. Daria comes down, just floods the board, and what does Aggro Blood do about this? Like, at 9, there's not much that he can do. If he was playing Vengeance Blood, he'd have, potential to win. Not with his current hand, but there's nothing. There's literally no scenario that allows him to win this.
Humpty Dumpty. That's the scenario. I thought it up.
Exactly.
Perfect board for it. But otherwise, yeah. Couldn't handle that tempo swing. That's where we see really how good Daria can be. I'm liking it, and I'm convinced of it. I think the change has actually made a really good environment for that list.
Daria has a lot of stats on that thing. 5/5 to 7/7 for what could be 0 cost. And that was a good draw on the hand with the boost, getting the second Daria and then being able to Fate's Hand instantly. That's pretty good. Or I guess Daria can